Order the meeting of County of Placer Oversight Board of the successor agency of the former Placer County Redevelopment Agency at 10:31 a.m. on July 17, 2013. For the record, one of our board members is participating in this meeting from Duluth, Minnesota, where his presence has been posted in accordance with all law. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Jerry, would you mind leading us?
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Now is the time for public comment. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on today's agenda. Under state law, matters presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the board at this time. For items appearing on the agenda, the public is invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for board consideration. Any person addressing the board will be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes so that all interested parties have an opportunity to speak. Comments from the audience without coming forward to the podium will be disregarded or ruled out of order. Please state your name and address for the record. Are there any public comments on any item not on today's agenda at this time? All right, seeing none, we will move forward to item number 4 on our agenda. We're receiving an update on agreement negotiations with BBLLC. Allison Carlos presenting.
Good morning, Allison Carlos with Sue Block, your counsel for the successor agency. This item is not an action item. We are requesting no action, but we are presenting the update on the negotiations for the loan workout agreement negotiation with BBLLC and the successor agency. We are pleased to receive any comments you might have at the end of the presentation and certainly answer your questions. So as the staff report identifies, at your June 25th meeting, your board identified significant key terms for BBLLC to respond to by the meeting date today. Further, you directed staff to ensure that we responded in writing to John Davis, as the manager for BBLLC's letter on his terms. The key terms that you identified as wanting to hear back regarding were, 1, to take action, appropriate actions by BBLLC with the Placer County Treasurer tax collector to resolve the delinquent property taxes. Now, while it's been recognized that the 2012-13, what we call the current taxes, have been paid, and that tax repayment plans have been entered into for 4 of the 16 parcels affected. To date, that amounts to about $135,000. That has been paid by BBLC to the Treasurer Tax Collector. So while that's been done, on the 25th, your board addressed the need for, again, the cure of over $750,000 of current delinquent taxes. So just to be clear, the current taxes have been paid, 4 repayment plans have been entered into, a total payment from BBLLC of around $135,000. Notwithstanding, you had an interest in seeing progress towards resolution of over $750,000 of delinquent taxes and penalties. So it's important also to remember that by code, any developer application can only be accepted by the county after the delinquent taxes are resolved. And of course, you know, resolution could be that there's a tax repayment plan entered into for the residual of the 16 parcels for the 12 additional parcels. So it's not like someone has to come up with $750,000 overnight. To enter into tax repayment plans for the residual will cost about $130,000, however, just so you know. But it is important to remember that any developer for the site will need to clear delinquent taxes by either payment or repayment plan acceptable to the treasurer tax collector. That is a treasurer tax collector obligation. Under law, the county successor agency does not have the ability to effect the resolution of that. The second term that you discussed was you wanted to have a set aside of funds that would be used to cover the cost of environmental review and entitlement processing for the project. Now, this was a significant concession by your board, the successor agency, and the successor agency to not obligate BBLLC to pay a $1.5 million upfront payment as additional security for the notes, as that was the original term that was under consideration. So in lieu of that, you modified and made a concession to only restate the need for a payment of an obligation that will be required of any other developer for the site who is going to go through environmental review and seeking entitlements. And you had requested that be a condition in the loan workout agreement, while again any developer will have to do that, and we had talked about $300,000 for that. The third term was to commit to maintain the properties as assembled for a unified project. Your board, the successor agency, and certainly the Kings Beach community continually expresses the desire and plans to bring a high-quality mixed-use project for the BBLLC site as practical and to the fullest extent possible under the requirements of the Dissolution Act. So that plan is also contained and continues to be contained in all of the it's in the current planning effort and the continued and planning efforts for the Kings Beach area by the county staff, the planning department, and all involved. So there is a steadfast interest, and that was expressed in your desire for term to keep the properties assembled. And so that would conclude the three terms, the third one being we need to keep the properties together if possible. On June 28th, staff sent the letter to John Davis reiterating those three terms as well as to respond to all proposed terms that he had conveyed to date. In response, we heard from BBLLC through John Davis's attorney, Mark Carlquist. And that letter was attached in your staff report. The letter conveys the conclusion by BBLLC that the critical issues that we've identified are not subject to resolution acceptable to both parties, and their determination that a mutually acceptable agreement is not ascertainable. Mr. Carlquist's letter also communicate BBLLC's application of the agency's good faith effort, acknowledgement of good faith effort and willingness to cooperate, his willingness to cooperate with the agency as we seek other alternatives. So in conclusion, in light of this letter, staff will proceed with agency responsibilities for the wind down efforts under the Dissolution Act as pertains to the BBLLC loans, with the goal, again, to the fullest extent possible, of facilitating the delivery of a high-quality mixed-use project. And we've identified in the staff report the options for doing that are proceeding with a foreclosure. The interest would be for cooperative foreclosure, which should be possible given the stated interest by Mr. Carlquist to cooperate. We would want that free of all liens except the existing tax lien. It's anticipated that would be a 4 to 6 month process. We could accept a deed in lieu of foreclosure, which would be essentially for a foreclosure in a more rapid time frame, and we can effect the conveyance of the property to a new developer. If a third-party developer is identified, we would like to arrange, certainly, that the BBLC would convey the property directly to a private party. With all of those alternatives, the agency would implement requirements regarding maintenance and development. The agency would take the responsibility for maintaining the property. That could be through a contractor and so forth. We will determine that at the appropriate time. And we will include this property now on the long-range property management plan, which we would bring forward to your board. Certainly that would be amended if we could transfer it directly to a private party, which is clearly our interest. Through this document, we again will be pressing to deliver the high-quality project you and the community are expecting. In their interim, after today, and with your concurrence, we will immediately proceed to actively solicit interest from parties that may be willing and able to take ownership of the properties and deliver a project as contemplated. So that concludes my staff report, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Allison. I'm going to start by, since he's on the phone and it's a little bit complicated, asking Dr. Feist if he has any questions or comments before we move to the board that's here present today.
No, I do not. Thank you for asking. I've read all the material. We're obviously at that point where we need to consider one of the three options that's been proposed, so I have no question.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring it back to the board then, starting down here. Anything from you, Chris?
No, just it's disappointing. I guess it didn't work out, but I'm glad we have clarity now, and the both parties agreeing the next steps forward. So I guess one question I would have is we take over ownership as a successor agency. There's revenues coming in from those properties. We start attaining that revenue, right? And that'd be part of the management plan that you'd put forward.
It could be part of the management plan. I think we'll discern whether or not we need to put that in there. But yes, we would intend to use those rents to maintain the property, and to the extent we have any tax obligation, potentially consider that. There also may be some avenues by which this could be part of the recognized obligation payment schedule. We just need to ferret out all of that. But yes, we would intend to do that. One thing I do want to clarify also is because this today is not an action statement, staff would come back to your board at the meeting in August with a very specific action and a resolution for steps that we would be taking.
So just to be clear, then you are looking for direction from the board today, but no action.
Correct, and I think to the extent that we have an interest in immediately trying to find someone who can develop that property in the manner the community is expecting, and that your board and the successor agency board would like to have it developed, we would like to pursue that immediately after this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Chris, any more questions? Nope. Jerry?
No, yes.
Tom?
I do. Department of Finance, how is this going to impact future, the ROPS, and if we do go with another developer, are we still going to have money available through tax increment?
It's our intention to, once this is an asset of the successor agency, to treat it on the recognized obligation payment schedule as an obligation, and for us to construct what that obligation looks like and to seek tax increment.
In light of the Department of Finance and what they're doing, do you feel confident that that will be an eligible expense?
I feel fairly confident of that. As an asset of the successor agency, the successor agency does have the right and the obligation to maintain the property and to pay the expenses involved in owning and operating the property. So pending disposition to a third party, I believe it would be an enforceable obligation of the successor agency and eligible for inclusion on the ROPS.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
Thank you. Along the same lines, will Placer County or the successor, since the successor agency is separate from Placer County, will the successor agency be required to negotiate the back taxes and to pay the back taxes as we hold the property?
I have that specific question out to our treasurer, and I think the answer is yes. What I want to just also discern is whether or not June 30th of 2014, when the properties, if there is no resolution of the taxes, if the properties would be sold, if we're subject to that same process, and I think we are.
Mm-hmm. Will we be able, assuming that, one of the questions to be answered would be, would we be able to negotiate a repayment plan?
I think the answer to that question is probably yes, but I will come back to you with it.
Okay, the second question I have is what are the annual costs? Are they covered by the rents?
Currently, as we understand it from information received from John Davis, yes, I think the net positive cash flow was around $150,000 or $160,000. Certainly, we would be looking to achieve any same efficiency, so I think that would be yes. And if that's the case, if we do have to enter a tax repayment plan, we have the option then of perhaps using some of that for that purpose.
Okay, and the third question I have is regarding Colquist's letter regarding the questions remaining at impasse. He does not say in here which questions remain at impasse. I'm concerned that they're different than what we talked about in the past meetings.
I had a conversation with Mr. Carlquist yesterday to inform him of the meeting. He did receive the agenda packet, and I wanted to touch base with him to just clarify if there were any misunderstandings and to ensure that he and his client had an opportunity to attend the meeting to clarify anything that was misunderstood. He did restate in the conversation that his client at this point, that the letter had not been, that our interpretation of the letter was accurate, that his client felt that there was not a path to move forward. However, if anything, I invited him to communicate with his client and to let us know at this meeting or prior to this meeting if there was any misunderstanding in that regard.
The agency at its last meeting had the three items that we thought were of the ones that we were concerned about. We thought they were equally of concern to the developer. But nothing was stated along those lines of what has caused this impasse to become intractable.
Mr. Carlquist didn't get more specific. I think it was just the totality of the circumstances.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the board? Sue or Allison, if we do convey the property to an unidentified new developer, can we condition that upon things such as keeping the property whole, putting the $300,000 toward the development application process? Are we able to do that as part of our action?
Yes, I think we can. It's a fluid process, and certainly to the extent it matches what we have constructed in the long-range management plan, that would be important. And so how we treat this in the long-range management plan will be significant.
Okay. If there are no other questions at this point in time, I do see a representative here. Wyatt, did you have anything that you wanted to say or add to the conversation?
Sure, Wyatt Ogilvy. I'm actually here in representation of BBLC. John Davis and Mark Carlquist both asked that I attend. And I have kind of a general statement that I'll read just for the record. But I did have two different points. One, in response to Mr. McIntyre's letter, and based on my dialogue with both Mr. Davis and Mr. Carlquist, I think Ms. Block's answer is correct, that what I heard from Ms. Carlos early is that his letter was objecting to those three salient terms of the board, and that's actually not the case in my interpretation, and how I understand Mark's letter to be, that it is in totality. In part, really, the board had very salient 3 points, which have already been summarized, so I won't reiterate them. However, the June 28th response letter from county staff had broader terms beyond that, and so I think really it's in totality, and my statement will reflect that. And then I had a question before I read that statement. and that I was asked to pose, which is, has county staff been in discussions with or identified other interested development parties concurrent to this negotiation?
None that I'm aware of at all.
So with that, BBLC's position, as represented in Mr. Carlquist's letter, is based on their review over the past 7 months of the financial challenges facing the property, the monetary requirements for project entitlement through an EIR, EIS, and the corresponding risk. John Davis, as the managing member, has determined there are fundamental differences of perspective between BBLC and Placer County staff as it relates to the financial viability of a project at the site. We anticipate a similar conclusion to be reached by any party that completes a thorough evaluation under the terms that are set forth in that most recent June 28th letter. It's our suggestion at this juncture to inform either further negotiations with BBLC, which the staff summary kind of infers, and I'm not sure, frankly, if that's palatable to Mr. Davis or staff, but or with another interested party, that the county consider commissioning a third-party assessment of the property's development potential and the corresponding risk or financial commitments. A financially viable project that benefits the community and taxing entities will take both concessions and commitment from a developer and the county of Placer. So thank you to staff for your time, and that's all I have today.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Allison or Sue, did you have anything else to add? Okay, I'll bring it back to the board. We're being asked today to just give some direction on where we would like to see county staff move forward. I'm going to start with Dr. Feist in Minnesota, just to make things simpler.
Thank you for the opportunity. Maybe somebody mentioned it, but I could not hear all parties. It looks like, again, we're going to be possibly moving to another developer, and that, again, there's no degree of certainty there. What happens to the tax if a third-party developer wanted to get involved? The delinquent taxes, what would be the status on that?
My understanding is that whoever owns the property, the taxes will follow them. So to the extent there's a resolution of delinquent taxes or not at the time the property would move on, that would still be an obligation of the new owner.
So a third-party developer would need to, obviously there's costs of land involved, but there's also the delinquent taxes that would go with that property. That would be my understanding based on what was just said, correct?
That's correct.
My feelings are in the best interest of Kings Beach and in keeping all the property together and trying to get an improvement there that would be very helpful to the community. A third-party developer willing to take on this project would be, in my view, the very best option. That's easier said than done. That's the difficulty.
So just to be clear, Dr. Feist, of the three potential paths facing us, proceeding with a foreclosure, accepting a deed in lieu of foreclosure, or affecting a conveyance to a potential new developer, your preference would be the third?
No, and it doesn't mean that the BB LLC could not cooperate and there be somewhat of a short sale or some kind of a vehicle to make that happen. I mean, there is a combination of options that are on the table. But I'm looking at sort of the end result would be that in Kings Beach's best interest that there be a development project that takes place. It might not take place as rapidly as some people perceive, but it still could take place. But my concern is that with the land burden price, the delinquent taxes, and of course all the environmental and planning costs, a new developer is going to have a very high price tag, and I don't know if that's going to be feasible. But in my view, that is the best option.
Okay, thank you. Did you have anything additionally you wanted to add before I move on to the board here today?
No, thank you. So thank you for being so kind and asked.
Certainly. All right, I'm going to start with Mr. McIntyre. Any comments or directions to staff on this?
I have comments. I feel that it's important that in the atmosphere that the economy is in currently, that there is no quick solution to this problem. And it's important that we asked ourselves to do the same thing that we asked any new developer to do, which is keep the property intact, so that at a time in the future, a project that will benefit the economy of Kings Beach can be put together. So it's from my standpoint, it's terribly important that Placer County maintain this asset so that in a future date, and it might be several years, as a board member, that doesn't bother me as long as that we can maintain the property and not be an additional cost to the taxpayers. I would like to see that property, which is to me key, after the sidewalks and road rehabilitation and water rehabilitation, everything else that's going to be done in downtown Kings Beach, that property be maintained so it can consequently be developed into an asset for the people of North Lake Tahoe. That's my feeling.
Okay, thank you. Tom?
I think Ron said it very nicely as far as my feelings. The point now is that which is the best way to do it. And frankly, I think the third option might be our best option to go at this point. Unless I hear other comments, I would think that just going out and getting that third party at this time might be the best alternative.
Mr. Johnson?
It's really unfortunate we weren't able to work this out, the existing partner that we had, in my mind. If we go back to the dissolution, our charge really is dissolution of property. And that would include the interest of Kings Beach is secondary to that. But the long-range management plan allows us to kind of merge those two here. And so I think that we can have a win-win with both efforts, both charges for this committee. I think it's unfortunate we're in a kind of rock and a hard spot because we have areas in which we can't mitigate any lower. We have a third-party tax issue, we can't mitigate that. We don't have the authority or responsibility. So I think we have to do what is the next best option for us. And I concur with everything everyone has said, but I also feel the third option is probably the best initial starting point for that.
Okay.
And I'd like to see on the revenue stream, maybe to make this a more attractive asset to any future developers, is when we take ownership and responsibility for those taxes on the revenue stream. That's a monthly revenue stream? I'd like to see that money used to buy down that tax liability. So if you can erase the tax liability as we own this, and this becomes a more attractive property then for some future developer because they're not sitting on this liability if they want to develop it. So, and as tax entities with Gerald and I, and recipient of pass-through monies through the county, I mean that payment is of benefit obviously to our college. So we're kind of narrowly looking at that. To me, I think you can go forward on a couple of these fronts. You can work on foreclosure or the deed in lieu of foreclosure, and also go look for a developer out there as well. So I don't think it has to be one or the other. It can be a combination of things that you should have the freedom to pursue that as things progress with both Mr. Davis and his representatives and what's out there in the market would be my recommendation.
Okay. And I think just to be clear, the $150,000 or the $160,000 a year revenue is annual, not
Oh, it is
on a monthly
annual.
basis.
Oh, yes, I thought
Yeah.
it was the number.
Yeah.
Was collected monthly. It's
That's
collected
an
monthly.
Say we have this done in 7
Yes.
months.
Yeah, sorry, that's an annual number. If it only were monthly. Anything else?
I have one more point. It's probably in the ether, but there is going to be a new plan for that community at some time that Placer County does in the relatively near future.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very much concerned that Placer County work with the appropriate other agencies, specifically TRPA, to maintain the capability of that land for development. From time to time, we kind of lose track of those kind of things. And this one, if we have this major responsibility of taxpayers, I want to make sure it retains all of its development rights. So within that area plan that's being contemplated, Placer County should make sure that those rights are maintained.
Absolutely, and I think that is a critical issue. I know that depending on what happens here and moving forward, I'll be having conversations with both Larry Sevison and Jennifer Merchant, who are our appointees to the TRPA on the governing board and the APC respectively, to make sure that whatever does happen on that site, both in terms of the community plan update and TRPA's recent regional plan update, is consistent and still meets the goals and the needs of the community. My comments would be, I actually see the needs of the community on equal footing with what we do here, and I think that we can actually achieve all those stated goals. I'm absolutely committed to keeping the property together, though I think it's important to note that one of the conditions that we asked for in terms of keeping the property together was subject to review of the Oversight Board and the successor agency, that, Mr. Davis or any potential future developer could have come to us and said, would you consider, breaking the property up? It was not a hard and fast, you must, but it was subject to review. So that does still remain, I would expect that would still remain within the purview of this board going into the future. Okay. I agree with Chris that I think there are a number of actions that we could take simultaneously moving forward this, and I would just encourage staff to continue to see if there is some sort of, deed in lieu that could be agreed upon, just to make things simpler and quicker while beginning those discussions with other potential developers or partners to see if they would be willing to take on what will be a problematic and difficult development task, but ultimately will benefit all the special districts as well as the County of Placer. Dr. Feist, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I'm fine. It's very complex, and you just have to move ahead a step at a time.
Absolutely. Any other comments or questions from the board?
A question to Wyatt. Is pretty much BBLC washing their hands of this project, or are they willing to continue some kind of dialogue?
Anticipated that question potentially being posed, and so I posed that to Mr. Davis and Mr. Carlquist. I mean, I think that BBLC is open for discussions. What I hear from the dialogue across the members of the board is the same dialogue that we've been having. And frankly, Mr. Feist's comments, I mean, he stated the concern of the aggregate taxes, the loans and notes against the property, combined with the EIR cost, other soft costs through development, and the challenges that lie, and how that's attractive to a developer. And I think there's been a perspective of BBLC in the history, but John Davis has taken this over basically as a bank, or the county would itself. I mean, he's taken it over as an asset for a debt that's owed. And he has to, as any developer partner that the county and this board is going to consider, has to look at something that's financially viable. And so I think that there's probably an opportunity to revisit that, because the same challenges that BBLC has to look at what makes financial sense. Ultimately, if a project, and whether it's BBLC or ABC developer that's identified, if we can't deliver a project that's financially viable, that can actually obtain a financial commitment from a lending institution to go forth with construction, we haven't accomplished anything. And so I think the very things that your board's contemplating, another developer will as well, and so is BBLC. And so I think as we take a step back, I don't think this is an emphatic close, but I think we would have to revisit the terms across the front and the corresponding mutual commitment between the parties. Does that address your question, Mr. Hart?
Right, it does. And so I guess here's a question to the board. or to staff is that can we have some kind of parallel kind of negotiations where we can go out to a third party, but yet still keep our option open with BBLC? Or is it a waste of time and staff time and cost?
Well, I should answer that because Allison's going to be too polite.
I will.
Well, I mean, we've been negotiating, to me, Tom, with these guys for I don't know how many months now, and it's pretty clear from the letter that they say we just can't come to an agreement. So I just, let's let them move on. And, I don't see what the point is. We're kind of beating our heads against the wall with BBLC, and the discussions aren't being very fruitful. So in my mind, the way I read this letter and what staff has reported, it's just not working out. So let's cut it off and move on to our next steps is my thought. But
And that's the answer I wanted to hear. Thank you.
that's Wyatt. You want to step in?
Well, I mean, I have correspondence directly from John. I don't think it goes back, and it goes really back to my recommendation that to further inform negotiations, whether with BBLC or anyone, I think that going to a third-party assessment of these very considerations that are being considered, whether it's to talk to BBLC or anyone, for the fiduciary duty of this board to have a better understanding of those financials as it affects. I mean, so if you come back 6 months later and you have someone, and for that to be viable and to go forth to benefit the items of the community that Ms. Montgomery referenced, it requires a salient change of terms to get there, then is it really that BBLC has been, unreasonable, or is it really that to accomplish the goal requires completely revisiting those terms? So I guess that's my polite way of disagreeing.
All right. Any other comments from the board? Do you have enough direction to move forward, Allison?
Yes, I just will restate that the comments would have support the successor agency staff looking for marketing the project or marketing the property or having conversations regarding the property. We also would now take these three options and come back to you with a specific action and recommendation. Clearly, we're not the property owner right now. We're limited in our ability to in any way, shape, or form negotiate regarding the property. So I think it has to be made clear that we, yes, through the notes and how they're constructed, can immediately begin to collect the rents. We can do that, have them transferred to us, that sort of thing. But we don't control the property right now, and that is a little problematic in perpetuating this to some degree. So we will take your comments as an affirmation to look for other purchasers or interested parties, and we'll return in late August with a pointed recommendation.
And I think the message that I heard was have those discussions with potential new partners, but also continue to work on the foreclosure process. Is that correct? Am I stating that correctly, board members? Yes. Oh. Okay. Unless there's anything else, having completed all items on our agenda, I'm sorry, Allison. Go ahead.
I do want to just say we will seek to have the next meeting set in late August, so we'll send out that notification. You'll see that from Melissa.
And can we try to have that meeting in Tahoe?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. And we would, at that point in time, hope to bring the recognized obligation schedule, payment schedule, and the long-range management plan. Thank you.
Great. All right. Seeing no further comments, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you from Duluth, Minnesota.
Thank you, Dr. Feist. Enjoy your holiday.